I still remember the exact weight of the grocery bags cutting into my fingers that night. 2 plastic handles, stretched thin, swinging against my shins as I fumbled for my keys in the dark hallway of our 3rd-floor walk-up. It was just past 11, which was early for me on a Friday, but I'd left work with a headache that had been pounding behind my eyes since 3 in the afternoon. I texted Mia around 6, told her I was grabbing takeout on the way home and not to wait up, but she never responded. I figured she was already asleep on the couch with the TV droning, or maybe she'd finally taken my advice and gone to bed early to catch up on the sleep she'd been missing all week. The lock clicked and I pushed the door open with my shoulder, the familiar smell of our apartment washing over me. Candle wax, the faint musk of old wood, and something else, something sharp and sweet that I couldn't place. The living room was dark, save for the blue glow of the television on mute, casting slow-moving shadows across the walls. I kicked off my shoes and padded toward the kitchen, the floorboards creaking under my weight the way they always did, a sound I'd learned to navigate in the dark after 4 years of living here. I set the bags on the counter and reached for the light switch, but something made me stop. There was a sound. Low. Rhythmic. Coming from the direction of the bedroom. I froze, my hand still hovering over the switch, my brain cycling through possibilities. Mia was a heavy sleeper, but she never snored like that. And the door wasn't closed all the way. I could see a crack of warm light bleeding through the gap, a sliver of amber that shouldn't have been there because we always left the hallway light on, never the bedroom lamp. My stomach tightened. I told myself it was nothing, that I was being paranoid, that after 10 hours at the office and a 2-hour commute and bumper-to-bumper traffic, my mind was playing tricks on me. But my feet were already moving, carrying me down the narrow hallway, past the framed photos of us at the Grand Canyon, past the coat rack where her favorite denim jacket hung, limp and forgotten. I pushed the door open with the tips of my fingers, and the world split in half. They were tangled in the sheets, my sheets, the ones we bought together at that overpriced boutique in Williamsburg, the ones she insisted on because the thread count made her feel like she was sleeping in a cloud. Her hair was spilled across the pillow like dark water, and his arm was wrapped around her waist, his face buried in the curve of her neck. I recognized the back of his head before I recognized anything else, the way his hair curled at the nape, the way his shoulders slumped in sleep. I'd seen that exact posture 100 times before, sprawled on my couch after too many beers, laughing about something stupid, calling me his brother, his best friend. His name was Derek, and he was supposed to be in Chicago. I stood there for what felt like an hour, but was probably only 5 seconds. The air in the room was thick with the smell of sex and sweat, and the faint vanilla of the candle Mia lit every night before bed, the one she claimed helped her relax. I could feel my heartbeat in my throat, a dull, heavy throb that drowned out every other sound. My hands were shaking, not from anger yet, just from shock. The kind of shock that makes your brain go blank because it refuses to accept what your eyes are seeing. I opened my mouth to say something, but nothing came out. Just a dry, rattling breath that seemed to hang in the air like smoke. Then Mia stirred. Her eyelids fluttered, and for a moment she looked peaceful, her face soft and unguarded in the dim light. Then she saw me. Her eyes snapped open, wide, terrified. She didn't scream. She didn't gasp. She just stared at me, her mouth forming a small, perfect O, like she was about to speak but had forgotten every word she'd ever known. Her body went rigid against Derek's, and I could see her chest rise and fall in quick, shallow bursts, her fingers clenching the sheet like it was the only thing keeping her from falling into a void. Derek grunted, shifted, and his arm tightened around her, pulling her closer. He murmured something, his voice thick with sleep, and that was when I felt the first flicker of heat in my chest. "Get up," I said. My voice didn't sound like mine. It was flat, cold, stripped of everything. Derek's head lifted. His eyes were bleary, unfocused, and then they found me. I watched the recognition dawn on his face, slow and horrible, like a sunrise over a burning city. His mouth opened, closed, opened again. He looked at Mia, then back at me, and for a second I thought I saw something like guilt flash across his features, but it was gone before I could name it. "Man," he started, his voice cracking. "I can explain. Get up." I don't know how I kept my voice so even. Inside, I was screaming, a roaring white noise that filled every corner of my skull. But outside, I was a statue. I watched him scramble out of bed, his bare legs tangling in the sheets, his hands raised like he was surrendering to a cop. He was still wearing his boxers, which felt like a sick joke, a tiny shred of modesty in the middle of the most intimate betrayal I'd ever known. Mia pulled the sheet up to her chin, her eyes darting between us, her face pale and hollow. "This isn't what it looks like," she said, and her voice was so small, so fragile, that I almost laughed. "Then what is it?" I asked, "because it looks like you're fucking my best friend in our bed while I was out buying you that kombucha you like." I hadn't bought the kombucha. I'd almost grabbed it from the cooler at the bodega, but I'd put it back at the last second because I remembered she'd said she was trying to cut back on sugar. That tiny detail, that stupid, mundane thought, was what broke me. I stood there, replaying the moment in my head, the way I'd reached for the glass bottle, the condensation slick against my palm, the way I'd set it back on the shelf and picked up a bag of chips instead. I had been thinking about her, about making her happy, while she was here, in our home, wrapped around someone else. Derek was pulling on his jeans, hopping on one foot, his face a mask of panic and shame. "I'm sorry," he kept saying. "I'm so sorry, man. I didn't mean for this to happen." "Didn't mean for what to happen?" My voice rose, finally cracking through the ice. "Didn't mean to come to my house? Didn't mean to crawl into my bed? Didn't mean to fuck my girlfriend while I was at work?" He flinched like I'd hit him. "It was a mistake, a one-time thing. It didn't mean anything." "That's even worse," I said, and the words came out like gravel. "If it meant nothing, then you threw away everything we had for nothing." Mia was crying now, silent tears tracking down her cheeks, her shoulders shaking under the sheet. "I love you," she whispered. "I love you, please, you have to believe me." I wanted to scream at her. I wanted to grab the lamp off the nightstand and hurl it at the wall. I wanted to collapse on the floor and sob until I had nothing left. But instead, I just stood there, watching the two people I trusted most in the world fall apart in front of me, and I felt nothing but a vast, empty cold that made my bones ache. "Get out," I said, and I wasn't sure if I was talking to him or her, maybe both. "Get your stuff and get out." Derek grabbed his shirt from the floor, his phone from the nightstand. He didn't look at me as he walked past, his footsteps heavy on the hardwood. He paused at the door, his hand on the frame, and I could see his shoulders rise and fall with a deep breath, like he was gathering the courage to say something meaningful, something that would fix it. But he didn't say anything. He just walked out, and the front door clicked shut behind him, and the sound was final and awful. Then it was just me and Mia, and the silence between us was louder than any explosion. I turned away from her and walked back to the living room. I don't know why I didn't leave. Maybe I was too tired. Maybe I was too broken. Maybe some part of me needed to see what happened next, needed to witness the destruction I was about to unleash. I sat down on the couch, the same couch Derek had crashed on for 3 days last summer when his AC broke, and I stared at the blank TV screen, my reflection a ghost in the dark glass. Mia came out a few minutes later, wrapped in a robe, her face blotchy and raw. She sat on the coffee table in front of me, her knees inches from mine, her hands clasped together like she was praying. "I'm going to tell you everything," she said, her voice hoarse. "I need you to listen. Please." I didn't respond. I just looked at her, this woman I'd loved for 6 years, this woman I'd planned a future with, and I waited. I waited for her to explain how my best friend ended up in my bed, how my life had been dismantled in the span of a single breath. She took a shaky breath, and then she started talking, and with every word I felt the ground shift beneath me, opening into a chasm I hadn't known existed. Because the story she told me wasn't about a stupid mistake, or a moment of weakness, or a lapse in judgment. It was something darker, something that had been festering beneath the surface of my life for months, waiting for the right moment to destroy me. She told me the truth at midnight, and the truth was worse than I could have ever imagined. I sat there on the couch, the fabric rough against my palms, and I listened to Mia's voice crack and splinter as she tried to build a narrative out of the wreckage. She kept reaching for my hands, and I kept pulling them away, tucking them under my thighs like they weren't a part of me anymore. The clock on the microwave blinked 12:03, then 12:04, and I watched the numbers change like they were counting down to something worse. She told me it started 6 months ago, at a bar downtown, on a night I'd stayed late at the office to finish a pitch deck for a client I didn't even like. She said she'd run into Derek by accident, that he was there with some colleagues, that she'd only intended to have one drink and then go home.
But one drink became three, and three became a conversation that stretched past midnight, and somewhere between the second round of tequila shots and the Uber ride she didn't tell me about, something shifted between them. I listened to her talk about Derek like he was a stranger, like the man who'd been my roommate in college, my groomsman in a wedding that never happened, my emergency contact on every form I'd filled out for the last decade, was someone she just met. She described the way he looked at her, the way he made her feel seen in a way I hadn't, apparently, in years. And every word she said was a needle sliding under my skin, injecting a poison I couldn't name. She told me they didn't sleep together that first night. She swore it. She said they just talked, and then they kissed in the back of the cab, and then she went home and crawled into bed beside me and pretended nothing had happened. I remembered that night. I remembered coming home at 2 a.m, exhausted and half dead, and finding her awake, her eyes red-rimmed, her body curled into a tight ball on her side of the mattress. I asked her if she was okay, and she said she'd had a bad dream. I kissed her forehead and told her I loved her, and she said it back, her voice muffled by the pillow. I fell asleep thinking about quarterly projections and quarterly profits, and she lay there, 3 feet away, already in love with someone else. That was the part that gutted me the most. Not the sex. Not the betrayal. The fact that she'd been lying to me every single day for 6 months, waking up next to me, cooking dinner with me, laughing at my stupid jokes, and all the while, she was building a parallel world with my best friend. She told me they'd met up a dozen times after that first night. Coffee shops, park benches, a motel on the edge of town that she'd paid for in cash because she watched too many true crime documentaries and knew how to cover her tracks. She said it was never supposed to go this far, that she tried to end it at least 4 times, but Derek kept pulling her back in, whispering promises she knew he couldn't keep, making her feel alive in a way that made her forget, temporarily, that she was destroying everything we'd built. I asked her why. Why him? Why not just break up with me if she was so unhappy? And she looked at me with those big, wet eyes, the same eyes that had made me fall in love with her in a crowded lecture hall freshman year. And she said, "Because I never wanted to leave you. I just wanted to feel something different. Something different." I turned those words over in my head like a stone I couldn't swallow. 6 years of planning a life together, and she wanted something different. I thought about all the nights I'd stayed up with her when she was sick, the mornings I'd made her coffee just the way she liked it, the vacations I'd saved for, the ring I'd been paying off in a drawer in my nightstand, hidden behind a stack of old tax returns. I'd been saving for a proposal. I'd been saving for a future. And she'd been saving for a secret. My throat closed up, and I had to look away from her. The room felt too small, the walls pressing in, the air too thin. I stood up and walked to the window, pressing my forehead against the cold glass, watching the streetlights blur into streaks of orange and yellow. I could see her reflection behind me, a ghost in the glass, her hands still clasped in her lap, her shoulders trembling with the effort of holding herself together. I wanted to hate her. I wanted to scream at her until my voice gave out. But all I felt was a deep, hollow ache that settled in my chest like a stone. "Did you ever think about me?"
I asked, my voice barely a whisper. In all that time, did you ever stop and think about what this would do to me? She didn't answer right away. I could hear her breathing, shallow and ragged, like she was trying to find the right words in a language she'd forgotten. Every second, she finally said, every single second, I thought about you. That's why I couldn't stop. I kept telling myself I was protecting you, that if you didn't know, you couldn't be hurt. That's not how it works, I said, turning to face her.
That's not how any of this works, and you know it. You didn't protect me. You just made it worse. You let me go on believing that everything was fine while you were... I couldn't finish the sentence. The words got stuck in my throat, tangled with the bile rising in the back of my mouth. I looked at the clock again, 12:17. It felt like hours had passed, but it had only been minutes since I walked through that door, since my whole life had been dismantled in a single, brutal instant. I need to know something, I said, and my voice was steadier now, harder. Was tonight the first time he was in this apartment? She flinched, a small, involuntary movement that told me everything I needed to know. I watched her struggle with the lie, watched her weigh the cost of honesty against the cost of survival. She knew I'd see through it if she lied. She knew I'd catch the hesitation, the flicker of her eyes, the way her fingers twitched at the hem of her robe. She'd known me long enough to read me the way I read her, and I could see her calculating, trying to find a version of the truth that wouldn't destroy me completely. No, she said, and the word hung between us like a smoke ring. He's been here before, when you were at work. A few times. Here? I repeated. In this apartment? In our home? She nodded, and a tear slid down her cheek, catching the light like a tiny, perfect diamond. I'm sorry. I know that doesn't mean anything now, but I'm so sorry. I walked back to the couch and sat down, my legs giving out beneath me. I didn't know what to do with my hands, so I pressed them flat against my thighs, trying to ground myself in the physical sensation of my own body. I'd never felt more untethered in my life. The world outside that window kept spinning, cars kept driving, people kept living their ordinary, unremarkable lives, and I was in here, drowning in a sea of revelations that just kept coming, wave after wave, each one more devastating than the last. Does anyone else know? I asked. Did you tell anyone? No, she said quickly. I didn't tell anyone. I couldn't. I was too ashamed. Derek didn't tell anyone? She hesitated. He might have told his brother. I don't know. We never really talked about that part. Of course, his brother, the one who lived 2 blocks away, the one who borrowed my tools last spring and never returned them, the one who looked at me with that same knowing smirk every time we crossed paths at a barbecue or a football game. I thought about all those interactions, all those moments when I'd been the butt of a joke I didn't understand, and the rage started to build, slow and steady, like water rising in a locked room. I wasn't just the victim of a betrayal. I was the fool, the puppet, the man who'd been dancing on strings while everyone else watched. Wait, go for a walk, I said, standing up abruptly. Don't follow me. Don't call me. I'll come back when I'm ready. Please don't leave, she begged, reaching for my arm. Please, we can figure this out. We can fix this. I shook her off, not because I was angry, but because I couldn't bear the feel of her skin against mine. It was the same skin I'd kissed 1,000 times, the same arms that had held me in the dark, and now it felt foreign, alien, like touching a stranger in a dream. I grabbed my keys from the hook by the door and walked out into the hallway, the door clicking shut behind me with a sound that echoed like a gunshot. The night air hit my face as I stepped outside, and I took a deep breath, filling my lungs with the smell of rain and asphalt. I started walking, no destination in mind, just moving, putting one foot in front of the other until my legs ached and my mind went quiet. I passed the bodega where I'd almost bought the kombucha, past the bar where Mia and Derek had their first kiss, past the coffee shop where we'd had our first date 6 years ago, back when everything was simple and bright and full of possibility. I walked until I reached the bridge, the one that spanned the river and connected our neighborhood to the city beyond, and I stood there, leaning against the railing, staring down at the black water churning below. I thought about calling my mom. I thought about calling Derek and screaming at him until my throat bled.
I thought about driving to his apartment and doing something I'd regret, something that would land me in a jail cell with nothing but the memory of this night to keep me warm. But I didn't do any of that. I just stood there, watching the lights of the city flicker and blur, and I let myself feel everything I'd been holding back. The grief came first, a raw, primal ache that made my knees buckle and my chest heave with sobs I couldn't control. I cried for the life I'd lost, the future I'd planned, the woman I'd loved with every part of my soul. I cried for the friendship I treasured, the brother I trusted, the man who'd stood beside me at my father's funeral and promised he'd always have my back. I cried for the version of myself that had walked into that apartment 2 hours ago, blissfully ignorant, carrying grocery bags and good intentions, and I grieved for him like he'd died. Then the anger came, hot and sharp, burning through the grief like wildfire. I clenched my fists so hard my nails bit into my palms, and I imagined Derek's face, imagined punching it until I couldn't see anything but red. I imagined Mia's eyes, those pleading, desperate eyes, and I wanted to make her feel a fraction of the pain she'd inflicted on me. I wanted to break something. I wanted to scream. I wanted to tear the world apart with my bare hands and scatter the pieces so no one could ever put them back together. But I didn't. I stayed there on that bridge until the rage ebbed and left me hollow and numb. I checked my phone, 2:47 a.m. Mia had texted me 7 times, each message more frantic than the last, but I didn't open any of them. I didn't want to see her words. I didn't want to hear her voice, even in text. I needed the silence. I needed the void. When I finally walked back to the apartment, the sun was beginning to rise, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold that felt obscene in their beauty. I climbed the stairs slowly, each step heavier than the last, and I paused at the door, my hand hovering over the knob. I could hear her inside, pacing, her footsteps soft and uneven on the hardwood. I could hear her crying, muffled sobs that she was trying to hide behind her hand. I opened the door, and she was there, waiting, her face swollen and streaked with tears. She opened her mouth to speak, but I held up my hand, stopping her before she could say a word. "I'm not ready to talk," I said, my voice hoarse and tired. "I'm going to take a shower, and then I'm going to sleep. When you wake up, you're going to tell me everything, every detail, every lie. I want to know it all." She nodded, relief flickering in her eyes like a dying flame. I walked past her, into the bathroom, and I turned the water as hot as it would go. I stood under the spray, watching the steam rise around me, and I let the heat scald my skin until I couldn't feel anything else. I woke up to the smell of coffee and the sound of a spoon clinking against ceramic, and for one blissful, disoriented second, I forgot everything. My body was heavy with the kind of sleep that comes from sheer exhaustion, the kind that leaves you feeling more drained than when you closed your eyes. I blinked at the ceiling, tracing the familiar crack that ran from the corner of the room to the light fixture, and I let myself float in that brief moment of ignorance before the memory of the night before crashed over me like a wave of ice water. I sat up slowly, my joints aching, my head pounding with the dull throb of a migraine that had been building since I walked through that door. The sheets were tangled around my legs, and I realized I'd fallen asleep in my jeans, still wearing the same shirt I'd had on at work. The fabric was stiff with sweat and the faint metallic smell of the rain that had soaked through my jacket on the bridge. I swung my legs over the side of the bed and sat there for a long moment, my elbows on my knees, my face buried in my hands, trying to summon the strength to face whatever was waiting for me on the other side of that door. I could hear Mia moving around the kitchen, the soft clatter of dishes, the hum of the refrigerator cycling on and off. She was trying to be quiet, I could tell, trying to make herself small and unobtrusive, like a mouse hoping the cat wouldn't notice it. But I noticed everything. Every sound, every creak of the floorboards, every muffled sniffle that escaped her throat. I noticed the way the light filtered through the blinds, casting stripes of gold and shadow across the floor.
I noticed the dust motes dancing in the air, suspended in that liminal space between night and morning. I noticed all of it, because my brain had gone into overdrive, cataloging every detail like I was preparing for an exam I hadn't studied for. I stood up and walked to the bathroom, splashing cold water on my face and avoiding my own reflection in the mirror. I didn't want to see the dark circles under my eyes, or the hollow look in my gaze, or the way my jaw was clenched so tight it ached. I brushed my teeth with mechanical precision, scrubbing until my gums bled, and I ran a hand through my hair, trying to tame the mess that had become of me. It was a pointless gesture. I looked like hell, and I felt like worse. When I finally walked out into the living room, Mia was sitting on the couch with 2 mugs of coffee on the table in front of her, steam curling up in lazy spirals. She changed out of the robe and into a pair of jeans and one of my old sweatshirts, the gray one with the frayed cuffs that I'd had since college. Seeing her in it made my chest tighten with a pain I couldn't name. She'd always worn my clothes, ever since the first month we started dating, stealing my hoodies and t-shirts and claiming they smelled like me. I used to find it endearing.
Now it felt like a violation, like she'd taken something that was mine and made it hers without asking. She looked up at me as I entered, her eyes red and swollen, her face pale and drawn. She'd been crying again, I could tell, and there was a fresh sheen of tears on her cheeks that she was trying to hide by looking down at her hands. She pushed one of the mugs toward me, an offering, a peace treaty that I wasn't ready to sign. "I made it the way you like it," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Just a little cream, no sugar." I didn't touch the mug. I sat down on the armchair across from her, putting as much distance between us as the small room would allow. I needed the space. I needed to be able to breathe without inhaling the scent of her perfume, the familiar vanilla and sandalwood that used to comfort me and now made me feel like I was suffocating. "Start talking," I said. "From the beginning. Don't leave anything out." She nodded, wiping her eyes with the back of her hand, and took a shaky breath. I watched her gather herself, watched her shoulders rise and fall as she steadied her voice, and I felt a cold detachment settle over me like a second skin. I didn't want to feel anything. I couldn't afford to feel anything. If I let myself feel, I'd shatter into 1,000 pieces, and I needed to stay whole for whatever was coming next. She told me the story again, but this time she went deeper. She told me about the first time she and Derek had sex, in the back of his car in a parking lot behind a grocery store, like a couple of teenagers sneaking around behind their parents' backs. She told me about the hotel room they'd rented on the outskirts of town, the one with the cheap floral wallpaper and the bed that squeaked every time they moved. She told me about the lies she'd told to cover her tracks, the fake work meetings, the last-minute errands, the sudden headaches that sent her to bed early while I stayed up watching sports in the living room. She told me about the text messages she'd deleted, the calls she'd taken in the bathroom with the water running, the moments she'd looked me in the eye and told me she loved me while her phone buzzed with his name on the screen. And then she told me about the conversation they'd had 3 weeks ago, the one that had changed everything. Derek had come to her with a proposition. Not just a hookup, not just a stolen afternoon in a cheap motel. He wanted her to leave me. He'd even drafted a plan, a timeline, a whole strategy for how they'd phase me out of her life and phase him in. He told her he was in love with her, that he'd been in love with her since the first night they met, that he'd only been waiting for the right moment to make his move. He told her he'd buy her a ring, a house, a future that would make everything we'd built look like a rehearsal for the real thing. He'd painted her a picture of a life without me, a life where she'd never have to settle for second best. I felt my jaw tighten, my fists clenching at my sides. I could see Derek's face in my mind, that smug, self-satisfied grin he wore whenever he thought he'd won something. I could hear his voice, that smooth, practiced cadence he used to charm his way out of every situation, every argument, every consequence. He'd always been like that, even in college, always able to talk his way out of trouble, always able to make people believe he was the one holding the knife. But this wasn't just some petty argument or a dorm room dispute. This was my life, my relationship, my future. And he tried to dismantle it piece by piece, like a kid taking apart a puzzle he didn't have the patience to solve. "Did you agree?" I asked, my voice dangerously quiet. "To his plan?" Mia shook her head, tears streaming down her face. No. I told him no. I told him I couldn't do that to you. I told him I loved you. But not enough, I said, and the words hung in the air between us, sharp and jagged. Not enough to stop. Not enough to tell me the truth. Not enough to walk away. She opened her mouth to respond, but I cut her off. What happened tonight? Why was he here? She looked down at her hands, twisting her fingers together like she was trying to wring out the truth. He came over to talk.
I told him we needed to end it for good, that I couldn't keep doing this to you. He said he wanted to see me one last time, to say goodbye. I shouldn't have let him in. I know I shouldn't have. But he looked so sad, and I felt so guilty, and I thought maybe if I just gave him closure, he'd leave me alone. But he didn't leave you alone, did he? She shook her head. One thing led to another. I don't know how it happened. It just did. And then you came home. I stared at her, searching for something in her face, some sign of remorse or regret that didn't feel performative. She looked broken, yes. She looked ashamed, but I couldn't tell if she was ashamed of what she'd done or ashamed of getting caught. There was a difference, and I needed to know which one it was. Did you ever think about me? I asked again, the same question I'd asked her in the middle of the night. When you were lying to me, when you were sneaking around, when you were in bed with him, did you ever stop and think about what you were doing to me? She sobbed, a raw, guttural sound that seemed to tear itself out of her chest. Every day, every single day, I hated myself. I'd look at you and think, this is the man I'm supposed to love. This is the man who deserves better than me. But I couldn't stop. It was like an addiction. He made me feel wanted, and I didn't realize how much I needed that until I had it. I wanted to scream at her.
I wanted to point out that I'd made her feel wanted every single day for 6 years, that I'd told her she was beautiful when she had the flu, that I'd held her hand through every loss and celebrated every victory, that I'd built my entire life around making her happy. But I didn't say any of that. I just sat there, letting her words wash over me like acid, burning through the last remnants of the love I'd felt for her. Where is he now? I asked. I don't know. He left. I haven't heard from him since. How convenient. He's been texting me, she admitted, her voice small. All night. He wants to know what's happening. He wants to know if you're going to confront him. I laughed, a hollow, bitter sound that surprised even me. Confront him? He thinks I'm going to confront him? Like this is some kind of schoolyard fight and we're going to settle it with our fists? She flinched at my tone, and I felt a grim satisfaction at the sight. I wanted her to hurt. I wanted her to feel a fraction of the pain she'd inflicted on me. It was petty and cruel, and I didn't care. I was done being the nice guy. I was done being the one who forgave and forgot. Show me the texts, I said. I want to see everything he sent you. She hesitated, and I could see the panic flicker across her face. She knew what was in those messages. She knew they'd destroy whatever fragile hope she had left of salvaging this relationship. But she also knew she didn't have a choice. Not anymore.
Not after everything she'd admitted. She handed me her phone, her fingers trembling, and I scrolled through the thread. There it was, in black and white. Months of conversations that made my blood run cold. He was relentless, persistent. He'd sent her paragraphs of poetry, photos of himself at the gym, voice memos that I couldn't bring myself to listen to. He'd called her pet names I'd never used because they felt too intimate, too possessive. He talked about their future together in explicit detail, painting a picture of a life they'd never have, a life that would have been built on the ashes of mine. I handed the phone back to her, without a word. My hands were shaking, but I kept them steady, kept my face neutral. I didn't want her to see how much this was destroying me. I didn't want to give her that satisfaction. I need to get out of here, I said, standing up. I need to go somewhere I can think. Please don't leave, she begged, reaching for me. Please, we can work through this. We can go to therapy. There's no we anymore, I said, and the words felt like stones falling from my mouth. You destroyed that. You and Derek. You made your choices.
and now you have to live with them. I grabbed my keys and my wallet from the hook by the door, and I walked out of the apartment without looking back. I could hear her calling my name, her voice breaking on the second syllable, but I didn't stop. I didn't slow down.
I just kept walking, down the stairs, through the lobby, out into the harsh glare of the morning sun. The streets were busy now, filled with people going about their lives, oblivious to the fact that mine had just imploded. I walked past them, a ghost in their midst, invisible and untethered. I didn't know where I was going. I didn't have a plan. I just knew I couldn't stay in that apartment, couldn't sit on that couch, couldn't look at those walls that had witnessed so many lies. I ended up at a diner on the corner of 5th and Main, a greasy spoon with cracked vinyl booths and a jukebox that hadn't been updated since the 80s. I slid into a booth by the window and ordered a cup of coffee I had no intention of drinking. The waitress was a middle-aged woman with tired eyes and a name tag that read Betty, and she looked at me with a mix of pity and disinterest, the kind of look you get when you're not the first broken man she served that week. I pulled out my phone and stared at the screen. I had a dozen missed calls from my mom, a few from my sister, and a voicemail from Derek that I knew I shouldn't listen to, but couldn't stop myself from playing. "Hey man," his voice came through the speaker, smooth and apologetic, the same tone he'd used 1,000 times before. "I know you probably don't want to hear from me right now, and I get it. I really do. But I need you to know that I never meant to hurt you. This wasn't supposed to happen. It just happened."
I love you, man. You're my best friend, and I'm so sorry. I listened to the message 3 times, each repetition chipping away at the wall I'd built around my heart. I didn't believe a word of it, but the words still cut, sharp and deep, reminding me of everything I'd lost. I sat in that diner booth until the coffee went cold and the lunch rush came and went, a parade of strangers in suits and scrubs and work boots, shuffling past my window without a second glance. Betty refilled my mug twice, and I let the steam curl around my face without ever raising it to my lips. I was suspended in some strange purgatory, my body present, but my mind wandering through the wreckage of the last 12 hours, picking through the debris like a survivor looking for something salvageable. The voicemail from Derek was still burning a hole in my phone, and I'd replayed it so many times that his voice had started to sound like a broken record, skipping over the same hollow apologies on an endless loop. I thought about calling him back. I thought about driving to his apartment and beating the sincerity out of him, watching his face crumple the way it had when I walked in on them, watching him scramble for excuses that would never be good enough. But I knew, deep down, that violence wouldn't fix anything. It would just make me as low as him, and I refused to let him take that from me too. He'd already taken my best friend, my girlfriend, my sense of trust in the world. I wasn't going to let him take my dignity. My phone buzzed on the table, and I glanced down at the screen. It was Mia again. She'd been texting me nonstop since I left, a barrage of apologies and pleas and half-formed promises that she'd make it right if I just gave her a chance. I'd stopped reading them after the first few. They all said the same thing, variations on a theme of regret that felt rehearsed and hollow. I didn't know if she meant them. I didn't know if it mattered. What mattered was that she'd chosen to lie to me, day after day, month after month, and no amount of beautiful words could undo that choice. I left the diner and walked to the park a few blocks away, the one where we used to have picnics in the summer, spreading out a blanket on the grass and feeding each other grapes while the sun sank low behind the skyline. I sat on a bench near the pond and watched a family of ducks paddle aimlessly in circles, their reflections rippling across the surface of the murky water. It was a scene of such mundane peace that it felt almost obscene, like the world was rubbing its ordinary happiness in my face while I sat there, hollowed out and bleeding. A little girl ran past me, chasing a bubble that drifted lazily on the breeze, and her laughter cut through the fog of my thoughts like a blade. I remembered the conversations I'd had with Mia about having kids. We talked about names, about schools, about the kind of parents we wanted to be.
We'd painted a future together that was so vivid I could almost see it. A house with a backyard and a dog and 2 little girls with her dark hair and my crooked smile. And now all of that was gone, scattered like ashes in the wind, because she decided somewhere along the way that I wasn't enough. I pulled out my phone again, this time to call my mom. I'd been avoiding it because I knew once I heard her voice, the dam would break, and everything I'd been holding back would come pouring out. But I couldn't keep it inside anymore. I needed someone to tell me it was going to be okay, even if I knew it was a lie. She answered on the second ring, her voice bright and warm, the same voice that had soothed me through every crisis of my childhood. "Hey, sweetie, I was just thinking about you. How's my favorite son?" "Mom," I said, and my voice cracked on the first syllable. "What's wrong?" Her tone shifted instantly, the motherly radar kicking in. "Honey, what happened?" I told her everything. The words spilled out of me in a rush, jumbled and raw, the story tumbling over itself like I was trying to get it all out before I lost my nerve. I told her about coming home early, about the bedroom door, about Derek's face in the dim light, and Mia's voice cracking as she tried to explain. I told her about the months of lies, the motels, the text messages, the future he'd promised her while I was working late to build a life for us. I told her how I'd walked the streets until dawn, how I'd sat in a diner watching the world turn without me, how I'd listened to his voicemail and felt my heart harden into something cold and unyielding. My mom listened without interrupting, the way she always did, letting me pour out every drop of pain until I was empty and spent. When I finally fell silent, there was a long pause on the other end of the line, and I could hear her breathing, slow and steady, like she was counting to 10 before she spoke. "I'm so sorry, baby," she said, and her voice was thick with tears she was trying to hide. "You don't deserve this. You never deserved any of this." "I know," I said, and the words felt hollow. "I just don't know what to do now. I don't know how to move forward from here." "One step at a time," she said. "That's all you can do. One step at a time, and you let yourself feel whatever you need to feel. Don't try to be strong for anyone else. Don't try to pretend it doesn't hurt. You have to let it hurt, or it'll eat you alive." I nodded, even though she couldn't see me. "I'm going to go to his place," I said. "I need to face him. I need to say what I have to say." "Are you sure that's a good idea?" "No," I admitted, "but I have to do it anyway." She didn't try to talk me out of it. She just told me she loved me, that she'd be there whenever I needed her, and she made me promise to call her when it was over. I promised, even though I wasn't sure I'd be able to keep it, and I hung up the phone feeling lighter and heavier at the same time. I walked to Derek's apartment, a 20-minute trek through streets I knew by heart. He lived in a run-down building on the edge of the neighborhood, the kind of place with a broken buzzer and a smell of mildew in the stairwell. I'd been here 100 times before, crashing on his couch after late nights out, helping him move furniture, watching games on his tiny TV with a crack in the corner of the screen. I knew the layout of his place better than I knew my own childhood home, and I knew exactly where he'd be when I walked in. He opened the door before I could knock, like he'd been waiting for me, watching from the window. His face was pale and drawn, his eyes red-rimmed and puffy. He was wearing sweatpants and a t-shirt, and he looked like he hadn't slept in days. I didn't say anything. I just pushed past him and walked into his living room, the same living room where we'd shared 100 beers and 1,000 laughs, the same couch where he'd slept off countless hangovers and told me his deepest secrets. "Man," he started, his voice shaking. "I'm so glad you came. I need to explain." "Don't," I said, turning to face him. "I don't want your explanations. I don't want your apologies. I want you to look me in the eye and tell me why." He swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing in his throat. "I don't know why. I never meant for it to go this far. I fell for her, man. I couldn't help it." "Couldn't help it?" I repeated, and the rage I'd been suppressing all morning bubbled to the surface. "You couldn't help it? You're a grown man. You made a choice. Every time you texted her, every time you met up with her, every time you looked me in the eye and pretended we were still friends, you made a choice. Don't tell me you couldn't help it." He flinched, stepping back like I'd struck him. I know I messed up. I've been beating myself up over it nonstop. I hate myself for what I did to you." "I don't care if you hate yourself," I said, my voice rising. "I don't care if you spend the rest of your life in misery. What I care about is that you took something precious from me and you threw it away like it meant nothing. What I care about is that you broke my trust, and there's no fixing that. Ever."
Tears were streaming down his face now, and I felt a flicker of satisfaction at the sight. He was finally feeling a fraction of the pain he'd caused me, but the satisfaction was fleeting, replaced by a hollow emptiness that made me want to curl up and disappear. "What do you want me to do?" he asked, his voice cracking. "Tell me what to do, and I'll do it. Anything." "I want you to stay out of my life," I said. "I want you to disappear. I never want to see your face again, and if I ever find out you've contacted Mia, I will make your life a living hell. Do you understand?"
He nodded, wiping his eyes with the back of his hand. "I understand. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. Save it," I said. "You've said it enough times. It doesn't mean anything anymore." I turned and walked out of his apartment, my heart pounding in my chest, my hands shaking at my sides. I didn't look back. I couldn't bear to see his face again, couldn't bear to hear the sound of his voice begging for forgiveness I had no intention of giving. I walked down the stairs and out into the street, the sun warm on my face, and I felt a strange sense of clarity settle over me. I went back to the apartment that evening, and Mia was waiting for me on the couch, her eyes swollen and red. I sat down across from her and told her it was over. I told her I couldn't forgive her, couldn't forget, couldn't trust her again. I told her I needed her to leave, to find somewhere else to stay, to give me space to heal. She cried, and I let her, but I didn't offer comfort. I didn't have any left to give. A week later, I packed my things and moved out. I found a small studio on the other side of town, a place with no memories, no ghosts, no echoes of the life I'd lost. I started going to therapy, sitting in a quiet office and talking about the betrayal until my voice went hoarse. I stopped answering Mia's calls, stopped reading her texts, stopped letting her into my head. I started to rebuild, slowly, painfully, one brick at a time. It's been 3 months now, and I still think about it every day.
I still wake up in the middle of the night, my heart racing, the image of them in that bed seared into my mind like a brand. I still feel the sting of betrayal, the ache of loss, the bitter taste of trust shattered beyond repair. But I'm getting better. I'm learning to breathe again. I'm learning to believe that there's a future out there, even if it doesn't look anything like the one I'd planned. And in the quiet moments, when the pain fades and the anger recedes, I remember what my mom said, one step at a time. I'm not there yet, but I'm walking. And for now, that's enough.
মনের ভিতর জায়গা দিলাম কলজা কাটিয়া প্রেমের ব্যথায় গেল হায়রে কলজা পাটিয়া কলজার আঘাত মনে জমা বলতে পারি না বন্ধু আমায় গেল ভুলে কইরা চলো না কলজা কাটা দিলাম আমি আমার প্রেমের দাম বন্ধু আমায় দিল না রে কলজা কাটার দাম কলজা কাটা দিলাম আমি আমার প্রেমের দাম বন্ধু লাগার না কলজার মাঝে নামলে কিয়া করলো বেইমানি কলজা কাটার ভালোবাসায় জন্য চোখের পানি কলজার মাঝে নামলে কিয়া করলো বেইমানি কলজা কাটার ভালোবাসায় জন্য চোখের পানি প্রাণের বন্ধু দিল আঘাত আমার কলিজা কলজা কাটার ভালোবাসার কান্না হলো ঠাই